Hello, friends. Today's topic is accords and bases. And these two concepts are mentioned often in perfumery descriptions, but often they're not explained. And on the other hand, there is a difference between them. Because bases and accords give a very different effects to fragrances and they're used slightly different way. So let's start with bases. And I would say that the whole concept of bases, in my opinion, was pioneered by Francois Coty in the beginning of the 20th century because he was experimenting with novel synthetics, which were quite harsh. And in order to use them in fragrances, he worked with perfumers to create specific combinations of materials around some of these stronger, more aggressive ingredients. So many of his fragrances had bases of that, for instance, around isobutyl-quinoline, and that was part of his famous fragrance Chypre that was launched in 1917. And all of his other fragrances have different bases and sometimes more than one. So what is a base? A base is a combination of several ingredients, and it's inserted into the formula is what perfumers call a one-line item, a total jargon term, but now you know it. And so this one-line item is inserted into the formula, and because the ingredients of the base, that's more than the sum of their parts, and they convey completely different effect, so they almost become kind of like one ingredient. One whole. And whether it becomes the scent of leather, the scent of carnation, or the scent of rose. That's how bases work. Accords are similar, but there is a difference in that sometimes accord can be also created kind of as a little base and inserted into a formula as the base would be just as a one-line item rather than its separate components. Or sometimes it could be really just separate components, and in the final formula they balanced with each other and they create this sort of like effect, a single whole effect. It really depends on how perfumer works and how he or she creates. But typically accords is just the certain harmony among ingredients. Then even if you are not aiming to create a certain harmony and you just included specific ingredients, sometimes they would convey a certain effect, and that would be accord. For instance, four really famous perfumery accords are Cologne, Chypre, Oriental, and Fougère. And they are inspired by the perfumery families. So they take elements of these families and kind of synthesize them in an accord. And used in the fragrances, they really create this familiar, instantly recognizable impression. So for instance, Chypre accord usually would have bergamot and rose and moss, patchouli and musk. And one of the classical Chypre fragrances would be Guerlain Mitsuko or Chanel number 19. But if you were to use these ingredients in a kind of an accord in a fragrance, you would create a Chypre effect. Even if your fragrance is not a Chypre, but it just has this Chypre inflection, and that Chypre inflection really becomes recognizable and distinctive. Cologne accord works the same way. It's an accord based around orange blossom and citrus, bergamot, different types of citrus. And it could be as classical as Chanel Haute Cologne or modern like Atelier Cologne Grand Neroli. Again, the accords in these two fragrances are very different, but both of them are Cologne accords because they take the main elements of the Cologne family, the freshness of citrus, the brightness of orange blossom or neroli, and they convey that impression. And then Fougère Accord is again derived from the Fougère family, and it's sometimes called barbershop accord because there's this freshness, very clean, and it's a combination of bergamot, patchouli, lavender, geranium, and one classical fragrance is Dracar Noir, but another fragrance that we can think of is Jean-Paul Gaultier, Le Mâle. And finally, Oriental Accord, it was inspired originally by the Oriental family and fragrances like Coty Emeraude or Guerlain Shalimar. But these days, it also finds its expression in many different fragrances. Its distinctive characteristic being warmth, sometimes sweetness, but kind of lush, rich feeling. And it combines sandalwood, sometimes rose, sometimes incense, jasmine, balsams. Richness is the defining characteristic of the Oriental Accord. And of course, accords in modern sense could be quite varied. And for instance, one fragrance that I very much enjoy is Frédéric Malle, Une Rose. And it has a rose accord in it, which is built also using this very warm, rich ambery note. So that rose amber accord becomes a distinctive feature of this fragrance. And when you wear it, that's the defining element of it. And one new accord that became popular over the past few years is Angel's Accord of patchouli and maltol, and which smells like cotton candy. So that patchouli and cotton candy, it's a really interesting accord because patchouli is dry and woody and cotton candy is really sweet, sugary. And this fragrance, Thierry Mugler. Angel really put this accord on the map. And these days, it's hard to imagine modern day gourmand perfumery without this accord. So those are the accords and bases, and the most important part is that to create a distinctive fragrance, you have to have a signature. And using accords and bases in a clever way is a way to reach that signature, to attain that signature, and to create your own distinctive fingerprint. So thank you very much for watching, and as always, if you have any questions, leave me a comment.